Hi everyone, welcome back to Side 9. I'm Fulminatus.
And I'm Riala.
It's an exciting weekend for Gundam Card Game. We're getting the first booster beyond the initial release. You know what that means: new cards, new decks, and new yaps from your favorite Gundam Cardtubers.
As you may know by now, I like cool cards, and this set's got plenty of them. If you're excited to try out some of these new cards or builds, please give this video a like and subscribe. And once you're done, give us a comment letting us know which archetype or deck you're most excited to play in this new metagame.
This set is certainly interesting as compared to Set 1, which that set amped up the starter decks and introduced every deck that currently exists, while this set is more of an expansion, meaning it's hard to nail down truly new decks so much as new parts of decks being introduced. This presents interesting deck build challenges, which I'm sure you'll see in the list we have for you today.
And with Fulm's point, it's only fitting we start with what we believe to be the fully realized version of Tekkadan Purple, featuring cards from Iron Bloom, Dual Impact, and even an old favorite? I'll let Fulm get the ball rolling.
So in this purple-blue list, we really brought forward Tekkadan's early value and tempo package, and we're hooking it up to Blue's Unicorn package. I really feel like these two cards complement each other, as Unicorn does a great job clearing the way of things such as bases and tamping down mid-game blockers to enable your Barbados' suppression swings to hit. In this package, we're actually going to be using our units mainly as early board control, so while it may look like an aggro build, it's really pushing forward to maintain that board presence and keep the board clear for your Unicorn or your Barbados to hit.
Yeah, for sure. And let's go over a little bit about, I guess, the structure, or the bones of this deck, right? So we're seeing here at this top row, I just love seeing this. This is always so great to see. But we got the return of the 2-1, 2-2, which we've gone in depth on in one of our early videos in GDO1 format talking about aggro decks. And so we have the full 8 copies there. We even joked about this in the past, but we now have a purple Rizel, and we love the stat line of Rizel. Early game drop, great attack value, slightly less good HP value, but just really a great stat stick overall. We also have Gundam Barbados First Form, which helps us get a little bit of card draw in with that. You know, this deck really just kind of goes in early game, and then, as Fulm said, has late game Barbados and Unicorn cards to kind of sustain the beatdown or start controlling the board if you so want to.
It turns out one of the best ways to deal with somebody having an aggressive board is just build your own aggressive board and run it into theirs.
For sure. And then about the Barbados Fourth Form and Unicorn Destroy mode is just the versatility there of sometimes your aggro beatdown in those 2-1-2-2s and Rizels and Barbados First Form is just so good early on that you can just use a suppression or a full Unicorn line to just end the game early. And I'm sure in testing that you've had those scenarios, right, where you're just like, okay, cool, I just win, right?
I've had more than a few games where you get a First Form online really early on, and it just keeps top decking you 2-1-2-2s. And the fun thing about that is that means that, like, you go into combat and you just start playing more cards per turn than your opponent does, and by turn 5 they're like, oh, you have a wide board full of 2-2s and 4-3s, and I'm just gonna die.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Gundam Barbados First Form just a little bit as well, because to me I think this is kind of just a pillar of this deck where you kind of look at what's going on in the deck and you ask yourself, okay, what is this deck really doing in comparison to kind of what the other tempo such aggro decks are doing in the space right now. And I think First Form really just helps sell this concept, right? And especially because it's IBO flavored, and of course we stand IBO here in the Side 9 household. But Gundam Barbados First Form is a level 3 2 cost with 3 AP and 2 HP, and it has an on attack trigger that when it is damaged you get to draw 1 card. And so immediately this reads as like, okay, cool, it's an early game aggressive piece that allows you to cash in for cards and clear EX base and all that good stuff. But one thing that's also really scary is that it's kind of a kill on sight, because if you're cashing in several cards with Gundam Barbados First Form's ability, you're just flat as a baseline better than a Show of Resolve, which we already know is an incredibly good card in Gundam.
Good enough that it's here.
Yeah, exactly. Do you want to go into a little bit about kind of just the play patterns that Gundam Barbados First Form creates? Because to me it seems like just you go in and you kind of present the scenario where you go, I hope you're on a gun tank, buddy, because this card attacking several times feels almost game winning, and especially very early on in the game.
As I'm sure most people are familiar with, there's a concept of card games where we like to call things lightning rods, which is to say, once they immediately present themselves, they will attract removal or they will force trades just by nature of like how threatening or how valuable the card is to leave alive. Barbados First Form is very much so a card that if it's across the table from you, you don't want it living multiple turn cycles, because every time it goes sideways, that's a card. It does also have the secondary benefit though of, so you play it the first turn it lives, it has Summoning Sickness, and you can either force them to play an Amuro to keep you from getting value off of it, or it passes the turn cycle, you ping it with your Ryusei Go, or you hit it with your Barbados Force Form if we're late. Every once in a while, you'll link them because you could do it, whatever you could do to get that 1 damage on it, get it damaged, so when it goes sideways, you get your card back from it. So even if you take a trade, they lose a unit, you lose a unit, but you drew a card.
I also love the draw pitch available in this deck. Of course, Ryusei Go, Gray's Custom 2, I believe it says. That's a card that allows you to self-ping. So it's a level 3 2 cost with 2 AP and 2 HP. Allows you to ping one of your own units to draw 1, pitch 1. Of course, that's how you're most of the time going to be getting your Gundam Barbados First Form that we talked about earlier, kind of there and ready to start swinging and getting cards. But also, very importantly, especially in a piece-reliant Unicorn deck, it is another instance of just filtering through your deck. And it's kind of funny to me that, and of course we talk about the Unicorn Tempo deck as kind of like a pillar or one of the decks that were present in the metagame in the Set 1 format. And that does have Overflowing Affection, which is a good amount of dig, and of course still has a Show of Resolve in its deck because it's blue-white as the color combo. And while this kind of has a little bit less dig overall, it's still just right there in terms of trying to find your pieces. You have a draw discard in Ryusei Go, you have the draw 2 from Show of Resolve, of course you're still getting cards from your bases, and you're getting that card each time Gundam Barbados First Form attacks with damage on it. So
I would actually argue that it has a similar level of dig, because yeah, we're giving up 4 copies of Overwhelming Affection, but we get that capability back in Gray's Custom 2, better known as Ryusei Go. However, we're also adding Barbados First Form, which lets us draw. Now, in some Unicorn builds, we were running Strike, which does give us the draw drop, but just due to how this deck plays, oftentimes you are seeing a similar number of cards. But because you're playing stuff like Rizel, Hyakurin, your 2/1/2/2s, and also adding in Barbados First Form to the mix, you're less reliant on really getting that valuable Unicorn out to maintain a presence. So even if it comes out a little later, you draw into your destroy mode a turn later, you aren't as reliant on Unicorn being the tempo changer for you.
Let's zoom in a little bit to Isaribi. This is a card that kind of came out with the Iron Bloom starter deck, and then kind of was quiet for a little bit, but it is situationally better Visalia, so it allows you to pump something by AP +2 as long as something is damaged, or the unit that it's targeting is damaged, which a lot of times just makes your cards have really scary AP values. A 2/1/2/2 being able to swing in for 4 is huge, and just, apply that to anything else, right? A Hyakurin being able to, or a Rizel being able to hit into one of the 0/6 bases, the 6 HP bases from Set 1, previously unheard of. A lot of times I feel like this card just makes your AP math work. And sometimes even, worst case, it's just the same as Vesalius anyway, which you're not really too worried about. So,
well, the other big thing about it is, and this is the way I find it most often gets used, is it pumps your Barbados Fourth Form up to 5 AP, which for most of our scary mid-game units like RX-78, that's the exact value that you need to trade.
Yeah, for sure. And then, also you're getting your card while you're doing that as well. Very, very beneficial to the player that's going in and doing that.
But again, as much as I don't want to downplay how oftentimes that 2 AP comes up, a large part of the reason that it's here is it's generally our best available 1 cost base. Again, we are playing on a tight curve in this deck. Oftentimes we do not have a ton of resources to dump into playing a base this turn if we want to continue developing cards, so cheaper bases are more valuable.
And of course, we'd be amiss if we didn't talk about some core weaknesses of the deck, because no deck is going to be perfect. There's no one size fits all for a card game, unless we're in like a tier 0 format that we call it sometimes, where there's just no reason to be playing any other deck and it's definitively the best deck. So here are some glaring weaknesses of this deck. Of course, the early curve is very easy to kind of fill out and just deploy your 2/1/2/2s, deploy your Rezels. If you have a first form plus Ryusei Go, you're cooking, you're starting to draw cards. However, we are on several key distinct packages that we're trying to go for, which is the full Unicorn package, which is 3 cards in total, and then the Barbados Fourth Form package, which prefers to be linked with Mikazuki Aga so I can get its suppression immediately. And so sometimes you just end up being clogged with these pieces and you don't have like the full line that you're looking for. So sometimes you get Ryusui Goes, but no first form to ping and start getting the value on these swings. Sometimes you get Destroy mode and Bonager, but no Unicorn mode, and you have to wait until you're level 7 to actually fully realize the potential of the cards and things like that. And so sometimes your hands, despite really being solid on the early curve, sometimes your hands just end up being a little bit awkward, and it feels like you can't fully engage in play patterns that are beneficial to you winning the game.
Yeah, and another huge weakness of this deck, and anybody who's played enough set 1 and run into enough red-blue ping, you know the pain of this, but because you are pinging your own units, you are much more vulnerable to your opponent also pinging you.
Yeah, if your first form gets gun tanked, of course you frown, and you're like, okay, well that was kind of whatever. But I mean, at least it's getting you the card so you're not just like down on advantage, but I'm sure it isn't a great feeling getting gun tanked.
Well, it also sometimes, just to dig deeper, you'll wind up dropping your Ryusui Go on a Rizel, and that puts your Rizel down to 2 health. It's way easier for that red deck to ping 2 health than it is for them to take the full 3 without touching your Rizel.
Yeah, so overall, this is a really cool deck. I think it's something that is really funny because when you take a look at the deck list, I'd imagine that a lot of people who haven't seen the deck before just kind of squint their eyes and go, so what am I looking at here? But the more you kind of unpack the deck and the more you realize what it's doing, the more you kind of understand why each card was chosen. The Unicorn package is, of course, strong aggression, but also allows you to break board parity, which is something that's great to do in Gundam. If you're able to break board parity and make favorable trades, you're going to be winning more games than not. And then overall, this is kind of just the best of the greatest hits album of the IBO cards that we've gotten so far. Just the best IBO cards kind of just together in one deck, and then some good blue cards that help supplement our game plan.
I do especially want to stress a huge part of the reason I feel that the Unicorn package works really well in this deck is because Unicorn Destroy mode really helps a lot of the weaknesses of Barbados, where you need something that swings ahead of Barbados to clear bases, so that way you can get your suppression hits. You also need something that keeps your Barbados from dying to blockers. So being able to slam base and tamp down a blocker means you wind up connecting a lot more suppression hits, which means your opponent's shields go way faster than you think they would.
Yeah, that's a great point. Any linked Unicorn is going to be dealing with basically any base in this game, because a linked Unicorn mode hits 6, so it hits even the 6 HP bases, and of course, Destroy mode is even bigger than that. So being able to clear that base and make way for 4th form to really deal the blows where 2 damage are being dealt, 2 shields are being dealt during that combat. Very, very impactful for sure.
And then just a fun little Easter egg, a really funny play pattern too is when you have a Ryusui Go, or you're trying to link a Mikazuki, and you don't have a good ping target, so you just ping your Unicorn mode before you trade it in for a Destroy mode.
Might as well, right? Cash in that cool draw and discard. All right, Fulminatus, I will ask you, because you brewed this deck for the sake of the video. I know this is Iron Blooded Orphans, your baby. Try to be as unbiased as possible in this answer, but how confident are you in this deck, or in this exact build, or just general concept going into the metagame for set 2?
So while obviously metas are very difficult, borderline impossible to truly predict with much accuracy, I am very confident in this list, probably to a similar level of what we saw with my confidence in the set 1 Unicorn list, which historically did very well over the course of the format. So I think that this is definitely going to be a deck that we either see perform well, or at the very least we're going to see some people heavily experiment with it to prove it's not good, right?
Right. That's when the fun's over, when people start playing it to prove the point that it's not a good deck. So gotta love that. Anyway, yeah, this deck's gonna be really fun. I'm personally really excited to just sleeving this up and trying it for my first few locals for this set. And yeah, I hope people enjoy this one and get some use out of it.
It is definitely a strong early showing for purple. However, I will say we have potentially the most popular, at least among Gundam fans, to talk about in this set. And I think the best thing that describes that is an AUEG base Zeta build, which I think that you've been brewing.
Alright, so here's our AUEG deck for the Gundam Set 2 metagame. It is white-green, and really the focus here is on Zeta Gundam, the flagship suit of you guessed it, Zeta Gundam. So it is a level 6 5 cost unit with 5 AP and 4 HP. Its effect is that when it's linked, you get to activate main, which you get to choose an active friendly base, rest it, and then you get to restand Zeta Gundam. However, at that point onward, Zeta Gundam then has the ability that it can't choose the enemy player as its attack target during this turn. So as you see at the top end, a bunch of 2-1-2-2s. We love 2-1-2-2s here on side 9. Very interesting early game Charazaku 2, of course, because Quattro Bagina, the white pilot here, is able to link with Charazaku 2. So, you know, we're in green anyway. Might as well just have one more link in the deck that we can. When talking about the overall game plan of the deck, of course, we're going up to Zeta Gundam, but while you're kind of climbing up the ladder there, we're talking about Gundam Mark II AUEG, which has an effect that on deploy, if you have a friendly white base in play, you can pair an AUEG pilot from your hand with this unit. So there's a lot going on here. It asks a lot of the player to have on that early of a game.
You say that, but I can't help but notice that there is no white base in this list.
Yes, exactly. There is no white base in terms of the literal white base, the one that spawns tokens that we know all too well from beta or otherwise, but yes, it is referring to the color of the cards itself. So I guess we can go into those real quick as well before we go into the full tempo play for Gundam Mark II. We have Argama, which is just a standard level 3 1 cost base that has 5 HP. It has the effect that the base can't receive enemy effect damage, so think breach or similar effects. So that's pretty good, especially when we've seen a lot of breach cards being heavily successful.
Eat your heart out, Gundam Wing.
Yeah. Exactly. Gundam Wing, no more. And of course, that's just the standout base, especially in AUEG, because our AUEG cards care about having bases in play. And so we want to have one that's a little bit more tanky. And then of course, we're on the tempo-based Kusanagi that lets us get a little bit more bounce as well. And we play mainly just to be supplementary white bases because we want to have enough bases in the deck to be consistent to get them. But
yeah, here at side 9, we tend to run lighter base counts. We're a big proponent of 4 bases to keep from clogging up, but I think it's, as you've proven, AUEG needs bases in play. Otherwise, we start dropping vanilla AUEG units. So 6 bases really feels correct.
And it's funny too, because when we say vanilla AUEG units, we don't mean AUEG units that have vanilla stats. No, because they have effects printed on them, they have lower stats to accommodate that new effect. So yeah, taking a look at Mark II one more time. So if a friendly white base is in play, you can pair one AUEG pilot from your hand to this unit. And so, you know, the true dream come true is having a white base that comes on out, and then you get to pair Camille to Mark II early and be able to get your stat pumps there. And then notably enough, Mark II links with any AUEG trait. So as long as it's either Quattro or Camille that's on this card, you get a high statted unit that's ready to just start going through EX bases. It's probably the biggest thing on the board by that point in the game. And you can kind of just choose to do whatever you want with it. And that's just kind of the beauty of this tempo play. It's the strongest thing on the board decisively at the time that it comes out, and you can choose where you want to go with it from that point depending on what's on the board.
Going second, you can realistically have a 6/6 out on your third turn.
Insane. And of course, you know, as I brought up, you know, this is just something that you need to have the pieces in order to do. So sometimes it doesn't always work. Sometimes it doesn't always work like on the exact turn that you want to be doing it. But, you know, just having in the deck as a tempo play, I think doesn't hurt whatsoever. And so, of course, we have all this lower curve to facilitate the Zeta Gundam that I mentioned earlier. And then at that point, you're trying to decisively end the game because we are not a grind deck. This is a deck that tries to go in early, has a huge tempo swing, and then uses the Zeta to pick off board a little bit because its second swing has to go for something up board, but that first swing during link can also go to face as well. So trying to decisively end the game after you see that first Zeta link is probably where this deck needs to go, because this deck has like no grind whatsoever. It has a little bit of grind. If you get like multiple Hyakushiki, you could make an argument, and you start AP minusing with Rick Diaz Red, but I don't know. I just don't see it. It loses to any deck that tries to go longer than it. So we're really trying to get that Zeta play, get that Mark II play to win the game pretty convincingly and on a tempo basis. So rather, you know, towards the mid game of, you know, most control lists would look like.
Well, I think it's fair to say that ideally with Zeta Gundam, you're looking to pop a base or pop shield, and then it's going to go for that value trade, so that way other units that you're playing beside it can just go face.
Exactly. Nothing feels better than a 2-1-2-2 just living, because shields don't fight back for the most part, unless there's like a burst that pings you like close combat, in which case, okay, we're out of here.
Yeah, your 2-1-2-2 does fear a battle of aces.
It sure does. And we want to talk about a little bit about, okay, so yes, we've talked about how, how much the deck demands from you. You want a white base, you want a pilot, you need multiple pilots for that matter. If you want to do Mark II into Zeta Gundam, one of your Camille's is immediately reserved for the Zeta play. And so, like, how do we just find a little bit more cards? Turning Point of History is quite honestly the reason why we're in green. We're mostly on a white shell in this deck, and all of our pilots are Newtype, so it allows us to look at top 3. You can show 1 to top, and then you have to put the remaining on bottom. Then if you have a Newtype pilot in play, you get to draw 1. And so that helps up the consistency just a little bit, alongside just, we're playing more bases, so we get more cards off of bases over the course of a game. If we're playing on average 1 more base, we're getting on average 1 more card. So that's just up in the consistency a little bit more. But yeah, this deck, to offer the weakness of, basically any deck in Gundam, every deck in Gundam does have a weakness. In this case, it's if we don't find your pieces, you definitely just flounder a little bit, and we're struggling here.
Well, I guess the good news for this deck is between Mark II and Ricketius Red, those both just link with any AUEG pilot. So as long as you find a pilot for them, you're good to go. And then making sure that you have a base, right?
Right. Yeah, and thankfully Quattro is a card that you get to draw and pitch one as well, along like when you get to play the pilot down. So it's more filter, it's more dig for this deck. So thankfully we are in a scenario where we are getting to see more cards, which hopefully leaves us to not bricking so often. But we're playing a best of 1 game at the end of the day, and if you brick, sometimes it feels like you've lost, which sucks when a deck feels like there's no comeback from a bad opener.
I actually am also a big fan of Turning Point of History in this deck. It's kind of filling the same role as like an Overflowing Affection would feel, but as opposed to getting the 2 cards of Overflowing Affection, you get to check 3 here.
Yeah, for sure. 3 is a bigger number than 2. Fulham is a genius. But, all jokes aside.
The alligator eats the bigger number.
Exactly. And so that's a great point as well. Seeing 1 more card helps us prevent that brick scenario that we are just praying. Of course, there's a mulligan in Gundam as well. It's not all doom or gloom if you don't like your first hand. But to me, that's really like the lose scenario of this deck, is if just the cards don't go your way, you don't find your pieces.
Yeah, definitely. And given the way that the deck operates and just the fact that Camille has the hero Yui going on, where he is a 3-2, except he's broader because he has that whenever you have a base, the deck really does feel like it turns into, I just want to see as many copies of Camille as I can get.
And Lord help us if the opponent gets to a wing 0. Take a look at how much of this deck list just goes poof to wing 0. It's like, it feels like it's half the deck list. It's not great if the opponent is able to turn the corner with their wing deck. Yeah, bad news bears with that one.
I mean, I will say a significant part of the deck starts living if you put Camille on it.
Life giveth, life taketh.
But with all of that, I know that this is one of the decks that you were actually most excited to brew, and so you've kind of gone to the races with it. How confident are you with this deck and its performance?
I would say I'm fairly to moderately confident in this one. I think the biggest thing, kind of as I've highlighted over the course of this section, I think the high roll is incredibly strong. I'd venture to say that perhaps this high roll is like the highest of rolls in Gundam, which is saying a lot because I've seen some Newtype ping high rolls in Set 1 format. It was not fun sitting across the other end of the table of it. The Mark II to Zeta Gundam bridge is just putting down 2 threats that demands an answer from the opponent. And if they don't have an answer to the Mark II and your Zeta is coming down, it just feels like you've won, because it's like, okay, well, they couldn't answer this first threat. Now they can't answer the second threat. Cool, let's sign the match slip and let's get rolling, and maybe I can go to the mall food court pizza before our next round. Outside of that, I think the reason why I'd say I'm moderately or pretty confident in this list, outside of being completely confident, is mainly just wondering if the mid rolls and low rolls are serviceable enough to get us through some bad variants when it comes to the draws. Like, okay, is the mid roll decent enough that with careful play and execution of the cards that are available to me, can I either outplay outplay the opponent, or if they get a mid-roll, it's the mid-roll versus mid-roll of their deck versus mine decent enough to secure the win. So that's why I'm not, just endorsing the deck wholesale. It's why I'm not 100% confident in this deck just yet, because I've yet to have the testing to figure out when the things or the pieces just don't end up in your hand, how often we're going to be winning those games.
Sounds like it's feeling a little swingy right now. Like it's a little feast or famine.
There are games where I play this deck and I feel like it's the best deck in the game. But of course, it's important to not view that with a bias, right? And like not just cherry pick the games in which I feel like this deck is really, really good. Because there are games where this deck has also felt really, really, really bad.
You ever hit that point that a base can't stick?
Jury's still out on this one, folks. And we'll find out more as the metagame progresses. We took a break from purple to talk about AUEG or Zeta Gundam for a little bit, but we're back on purple. This is the main new color introduced from Iron Bloom and also further supported in this set. So this is another take on purple, this time going with the color combination that Iron Bloom went for, and this is Gundam X. So most importantly, let's take a look at our 2 Gundam X, the namesake of the deck. Go over the first one, the big one first. It is a level 7 5 cost with 6 AP and 5 HP. It has natural suppression, which for those of you who do not yet know, it is a keyword that deals damage to 2 shields simultaneously when it's attacking. And then it has a during link effect that when you have 7 or more cards in your trash, all of your Vulture trait characters get AP +2. So it's a big dude, it has suppression, you get to take out 2 shields at once. And then as an added bonus, anything that has the Vulture trait starts getting really beefy as well in terms of attack. So of course, we should also mention Gundam X. The other one, the level 4 3 cost, it has 3 AP and 4 HP. And during pair with a Vulture pilot, when it's destroyed, you can choose a Vulture unit card that is level 5 or higher from your trash to add to your hand. So there's 2 options in this deck. Most importantly, the big Gundam X is a level 5 or higher Vulture. And so you can see where this is going. This is a discard based deck, baby. And we are facilitating that with a white package that plays Kira and the Strike Gundams that we know and love from set 1 and starter deck format. And really, this is a deck that is looking to maintain board and hold board and really just get those value trades until suppression can start doing 2 damage at a time and just wrap up the game twice as fast that any other, late game deck is trying to do.
I mean, it also helps that a linked Gundam X is a big boy at 7/7.
Yeah, and that's because we have a little treat in a +1/+2 pilot. It's not super often that we get to see those, because to me it still feels like a level 4 1 cost +2/+1 pilot is the standard in this game.
Shout out to Kira Yamato, also in the deck.
Shout out to Kira. Kira's come a long way, and by come a long way, I mean not that far since beta. No, I'm kidding, but Kira's still an incredible card. Gjallarhorn Tifa Adil is a pilot that gives +1 AP and 2 HP, and then when it's paired, you get to discard 1, look at top 3, you can choose a Vulture unit from among them, and then add it to hand, and you return the rest to bottom. So, interestingly enough, you have to discard up front, so if you don't see a Vulture in top 3, you kind of just minus yourself, oopsie. So that's one thing to talk about when it comes to this deck. We are not on a huge amount of Vultures in this deck. We have 14 in total, and you're most likely going to be pairing Gjallarhorn and Tifa to one of your Vulture units already, so not a whole lot of targets. I did the Hyper Geo before this video. We're at around 70% for a hit. Maybe there's an argument to playing a little bit more Vultures to, forego the scenarios in which we actually just discard a card and look like an idiot in the process. So, but overall, yeah, a very good pilot that, by the way, does indeed link with Gundam X properly. I know that it just says Gjallarhorn as the link, but confirmed we are able to get the link through this play. And so, yeah, really, it's just a deck that's, playing with your trash, synergizing with the trash, and then trying to maintain board until Gundam X just completely wipes out the shields and you can claim victory.
To that point, in case people aren't aware, when that pilot name criteria is put out, it just means that their name has to contain the name that said. It does not have to match exactly. So for example, we have a lot of characters that have in parentheses GQ next to their name, and they still pair just fine with units that have the same name otherwise.
Right, yeah, cool rules processing when it comes to that. And of course, this deck, we always hype this up in a little bit just to, talk about what the cards do, what everything does, but obviously every Gundam deck does have a weakness. So the first thing that came out to my mind in testing that was always a struggle is that when you're playing against decks that have high amounts of bases, so we're looking at like the AUEG list that we featured earlier in this video, or honestly just any deck that someone brings to locals or a tournament that has more than 4 bases into it, you really have to do what you can to clear that base before suppression hits, because a key point about suppression is that it doesn't clear a base and a shield, for example. A suppression unit swinging into a base just clears the base, and sometimes you're like, man, I feel like I wasted that keyword.
Yeah, and I will say that this deck does struggle a little bit because it looks like we're kind of outside of Ale Strike. We don't have that many cards that can slam a base for you before X swings.
Yeah, I think the one saving grace is that if X is linked and you have another Vulture in play, like Airmaster or the smaller Gundam X, or even Gundam Leopard, that does get you the AP boost to be able to clear the base. But in the game states where you aren't just, stacking units on your board upon units on your board, you have to do a little bit of puzzling to figure out exactly when you're going to be able to get that suppression in. And aside from that, this does not have the strongest early game. If you have the horde of 2/1/2/2s that we talk about, just staring you down, you're going to have to hope that you're getting to your pieces that combat that, like Rick Diaz or Hyakurin, for example, that are able to contest that early board state.
Or even then, if you can get into it, like Airmaster can absolutely protect you for a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. If you're able to sustain and get those early pieces that help you maintain the board state and get to the late game, that Gundam X swing really is powerful. And overall, I guess when I talk about my confidence in this deck, I am fairly confident in it. I think the Vulture package may inevitably struggle that, unfortunately, it doesn't feel like we're playing like the best in slot if we were just playing like a straight up good stuff pile or value pile, but we play them because it just helps with the overall engine. So it helps seeing targets with the pilot. It helps with, filling up cards in the grave a little bit more, having those synergies that you're really looking for. But sometimes these purple cards aren't feeling like, if I had a choice of any card to make, Vulture, I would not choose this card, which honestly is just the downside of playing archetype focus in the first place. But overall, I do like the game plan. I do think at the end of the game, getting that suppression and just having your opponent forced to answer Gundam X, and of course, God forbid, if you find multiple of them, which is a little bit easier to do in this deck because Momentary Respite allows you to salvage a purple pilot back to your hand. So you are quasi on 6 copies of your purple pilot for this deck. So multiple Gundam X is kind of like your ultimate win state of this deck because, yes, that ability for AP+2 does stack. And so, yeah, even your lower end Vultures are going to be able to basically take out any threat in the game. And so once you're at that point, you're feeling solid, you're feeling locked in, and you're feeling like you're winning the game.
Well, even then, because I'm sure everybody could pick up on that middling confidence there. I do think that there's pretty decent potential that Gundam X may just potentially find another home basically as a standalone card.
Yeah, I think that's very possible. I mean, suppression and, even if we disregard the Anthem effect is what you're getting at here, I assume. Just being a big
dingus
is good. Of course, we went, the archetype path here, but I'm very open to perhaps another build that just is purple in another color that plays Gundam X at the top end, maybe even without the pilot.
And it's very appropriate that we talk about big individual dinguses because going into our next deck, we now have the biggest, dingiest boy we've ever put in Gundam in Epyon. I will be completely honest with you. I took one look at Epyon when he was revealed, and I immediately went, I don't care if this card is garbage, I'm going to force this. And then I'm pleasantly surprised by the fact that he is not garbage. He is very scary.
What does Gundam Epyon do?
So Gundam Epyon is a big boy at being level 8, 7 cost, 6/6. And then he has the ability that says, during Link, when a unit is destroyed by battle damage, reactivate him.
Who does Gundam Epyon link with?
He links with Zex Marquise, which also means that we're giving him +2/+1, and when he destroys a unit by battle, you draw a card.
Wait, I remember Zex Marquise. He doesn't say once per turn, does he?
He does not. So he can represent multiple cards. But I'm telling you right now, if you play this deck, you aren't crashing Epyon into much. That's a big scary boy that you want activating multiple times. So Epyon's going to spend a lot of time slamming into bases and shields while your other units are the ones that trade. Because Epyon doesn't need to be the one that destroys it to activate off of destroying something.
Right. That makes sense. Although I'd imagine sometimes when you have to, having a show of resolve on a stick feels pretty good.
Due to the nature of, if we're focusing on a big boy that does not come online till level 8, sometimes you are behind and you are just going to need more cards.
Yeah, I mean, imagine a command that says that, like a level 8 command that says destroy 2 opponent units and draw 2 cards. You could make the argument that command is playable as well. So, although granted, we are linking, so it's maybe draw 1 card in this instance. But
I hate that you brought that up, and I immediately went, would I play that command?
I don't know. Yeah,
I don't know. That sounds like it'd be pretty good. That would actually be pretty good.
It sounds pretty good. But, neither here nor there.
We always try to categorize how we're winning games here. However, I think that this is probably the most straightforward way to win a game ever. Epyon go big bonk. He bonk a lot.
He bonk a lot. Sometimes you talk about the play pattern of restanding Epyon and that being the end of your, attacks with Epyon. Just like being able to, and it's almost underappreciated, it seems, that just being able to restand Epyon and saying, okay, cool, now it's active, now it cannot be attacked in combat. That's a benefit too, right?
Yeah, so sometimes, when you're on one Epyon, if you have the blockers on board to keep the sustain going and you really don't want to risk just giving him up because he can be vulnerable when he's turned sideways, obviously. Sometimes you will just swing Epyon at shields or something, go for a trade to reactivate Epyon, and then you won't swing him the second time because you just don't want to leave him vulnerable. And the funny thing here is because Epyon is so big, oftentimes if he is active, there's nothing your opponent can do about it because he's too big for most of Blue's resting effects. And most things that let you target in green or choose which combats you get, his AP and level is just too high.
Let's go over a little bit about, I guess, the early to mid game of this deck, because of course, also there's Freedom and Kira in this deck as well, of course. We kind of glanced over that aspect, but, Ailstrike, Freedom, Kira, still present in this deck. I would imagine any combination of multiple Epyon, 1 Epyon, 1 Freedom, 2 Freedom, 0 Epyon is going to get you there in the late game. It's kind of just play mix and match with them.
So Freedom exists in the top end. It's one of those cards. We made it to late game, so now we're just looking to really capitalize, almost in a sense of being win more. But once you're in that late game, you really have to preserve the advantage you have, especially when we're playing these big cards, dominate your turns. It's not like when we're playing a bunch of 2-1, 2-2s and we're in late game and we're like, okay, I'm just going to throw 4 dudes on the board right here, right now. When you play an Epyon, that's what you're doing for the turn, even when you're level 10.
Yep.
So we really need our units to get value and stick around. Freedom is really good for that. A linked Freedom can represent up to -4 AP in a turn. It's -2 every time Kira swings. So it's a great thing to trade and live to be reactivating your Epyon. It's also really good because of the targeted negative AP effect. It can soften something up. So when you swing your Epyon into it, you don't lose as much HP and then you get your card back.
Yeah, and of course, you got to get there, right? These are some big level 7 and level 8 cards, so I'm looking at your early to mid-game suite of Gundam Lifrith, Rizel, Rick DS, Tall Geese, Ailstrike even. Tell us a little bit about just in testing how you found yourself able to get to Gundam Epyon. Have you struggled getting to Gundam Epyon? Have you lost before getting to Gundam Epyon? Is this suite of cards good enough to get you to late game, or how's that been working for you?
So I'm pretty sure anybody who's spent a lot of time playing high-level cards in this deck, especially given the prevalence of a lot of aggro builds ever since the first booster, it is a struggle to get to high levels of this game. It is something that you have to work for. And so in the initial testing and the initial builds, I went with what I feel most people probably felt was pretty obvious. And we combine Epyon with ramp cards in green. We play it like Wing Zero, right? And that consistently led to me getting my face speed in and sitting there at turn 7 or turn 8 and being like, okay, cool. I have my Epyon, I have my Zex, I have 1 shield, I'm dead. So that led to a similar conclusion that I'm sure many Wing players have come to, which is I need to play cards that keep me alive until I hit level 8. It is much easier to just naturally grow to level 8 by contesting the board than it is to try to force it through ramp. And so with that, we're running a suite of lower level cards in the obvious choice of Gundam Lifrith, our Rick Dias, and then the Rizel. These are all cards that people can innately understand, but there is a newcomer that has overperformed when it comes to aggro, and that is the Delta Plus Wave Rider mode, a new card in this set, and that is explicitly there because it can trade with as many 2/2s as you want because it has Repair 2 on a level 3/2 cost.
That's pretty sweet. Man, if only it linked with a pilot that was other than Reverie, but yeah, that
Yeah, if they printed Earth Federation on this thing.
Can you imagine? Oh my gosh. Crazy. Man, I'd imagine that's why they didn't. But yeah, eating 2/2s. Very fun. What's that tall geese doing in here? What's that little tall geese doing?
So tall geese is here to function similarly to a miniature Gundam unicorn. So the new print tall geese, when it's linked, when it attacks, you could choose a target with 2 or less HP and rest it. This gets a lot of chump blockers out of the way, especially things that have been like pinged or traded with. So, you know, they played something last turn and they swung in it and then they reactivated their blocker or something like that. The tall geese really tamps that down. It's also another out to link your Zex to because he doesn't do anything unless he's linked. So if you are stuck with a Zex in hand and you're going to die before you get to your Epyon, you have another target to link him to. It's also the reason that we're playing Deep Devotion. Deep Devotion, as a command action timing, you can heal for 2, or it acts as Lucretia Noin. The big deal about her, she's +1 AP, but she has the Oz trait, so she links your tall geese.
That's pretty cool. And then as well, because tall geese is happening earlier on in the game in Epyon, you have to wait until level 8 to get online. I'm sure that you aren't like that upset throwing away a Zex early on because you have Overflowing Affection, you have the draw off of the link itself that you're getting with tall geese, potentially even again on the following turn. And so I'd imagine that sometimes you aren't sweating too hard trying to find another Zex before it comes time to drop Epyon.
Sometimes you are. Like, to be absolutely clear, when you're playing this deck, you are holding onto your Zex like Grim Death, and you are doing everything in your power to have a Zex and an Epyon, because until you get those, your win con is not available to you. So most of the time, I will avoid linking a tall geese. That's why we're only at 2 copies. It's really just to fill this out. It does fill a role. It does give us value. That's why it's better than other units in the slot, but it is still a backup plan, for lack of a better way to put it.
Right, cool. So where are you feeling on this deck overall when it comes to your confidence in this deck or a deck similar to it performing well in the dual impact meta?
So when I was initially testing this using Green Ramp, I thought Epyon might be doomed to being a meme. However, after significantly testing the deck, I am pretty confident that this is at the very least a decent deck, basically off the back of Epyon is a huge threat. Epyon is a card that when it hits the board and it gets linked, it is something that your opponent has to drop everything and deal with that right now because he can run away with games.
Sounds good to me. Of course, it wouldn't feel right doing a every deck for Gundam Set 2 video if we didn't talk about the direct upgrade pathway or the final list or just an upgraded list in general for the Gundam G.F.S starter deck Clan Unity. So here's the Clan deck. Overall, the game plan here is to sustain your early board with the limited options that we do have available. I will be a bit critical of this deck's early game, but you have to get there in some way, and we have some cards that help us do that. Then you get to use your good clan buffs overall via clan battle, Red Gundam, or just, having your pilots attached to your units to be able to kind of make good trades into the opponent's units, or honestly just have some of your clan cards be able to battle cards that it had no right being able to battle in the first place. So, trading with freedoms, trading with unicorns, all those big cards, trading with Epyons maybe, sky's the limit. If you have a pilot plus a clan battle plus a Red Gundam buff, Epyon's gone, baby. So cool.
I mean, 7 is achievable here. Like, it might sound like a meme, but we can make 7 to 8 AP if we need to.
Yeah, especially because they stack, right? So clan battle with Red Gundam plus any pilot buff that we have. Yeah, you get to huge asinine AP numbers in this deck. And honestly, that's one of the big selling points here. Eventually, we get to play our G.F.S Omega Saikamu Red LR from the booster set that allows us to look at top 3 and get to play a level 4 lower clan from among them. So you get to play the Red Gundam, or you get to play like a pseudo Anksha that allows you to ping cards and things like that. And of course, anything lower
so it's
than
dual
that.
Gundam Assault Shroud.
It's dual Gundam Basaltra with better targets, arguably. And then, of course,
At the very least, more.
Yeah, more targets, thank God. Building Mono Zaft is still a painful endeavor, even in this set. But, of course, you eventually win just by accelerating the board so fast with that G-Quux Omega Saikamu that you just have more bigger things on the board compared to the opponent. What happens when you have higher quantity, higher statted things in the opponent? You're going to be winning the game through some route or another. Whether that be swinging shields and forcing your opponent to deal with your stuff or making those trades yourselves, you're in a pretty cushy spot at that point in the game. The problem, unfortunately, if this deck has a weakness, which it certainly does, is just getting there. We have a little cute tech in Wing Gundam Bird Mode because, honestly, we talk about, the Rick Diaz and Gundam Lifriths of white or Rizels in blue that allow us to be able to combat that early aggro. We don't really have access to that in Clan, and so I figured I might as well make the concession here, put in the bird mode, try to get us to that big G-Quux play just a little bit faster, because if you can get there one turn faster, you get to play more stuff, then you can start contesting board at that point and start swinging the game back in your direction. But to me, it kind of felt like a Hail Mary, like we have to have something that gets us there a little bit faster in this case.
I mean, that's fair, but I will say one thing that I've really noticed when testing this deck, and I think the thing that people need to be prepared for when sitting across from it, is once the deck does get to the booster LR, that level 7 G-Quux, it can do this really scary thing where when Shujis and Machus get to live, you deal with one G-Quux that drops something for free, only for them to play another G-Quux that drops something for free.
For sure, and there's some more aspects about this deck as well that's worth talking about. I think our pilots overall are very strong. Machu checks top deck for our clan, and then Shuji helps set up that clan, so the very few non-clan that we do play in this deck, we can kind of have Shuji and Machu kind of like they're working together like they do in the show, right? They get to kind of patch up each other's weaknesses, much like as seen in clan battles. One thing as well that's very important to look at as well is the red G-Quux Omega Saikamu starter deck LR. Of course, we have to go really deep into discussing that because there's two LRs that are G-Quux, but this one says, well, first of all, it's a level 5, 3 cost, 4 AP, 4 HP that says when linked if another friendly clan unit is in play against First Strike during this turn. First Strike overall across the board is a really strong keyword. Being able to start trading for board while not having your unit take any damage in the process is going to be one of those things that helps you turn the corner in this deck as well.
It also really leads into that ideal play pattern where you have the red Gundam on board, the LR red Gundam. It goes sideways, it gives +2 AP to your First Strike G-Quux that is now linked. That's 8 AP, that kills anything that gots to die.
For sure. So yeah, overall, and this is one of those decks that, less so talking about the strengths or the features of the deck. I think most importantly, this is a deck that's going to be pretty good at getting players into the game. So of course you have the clan starter deck, you have the upgrades in the booster set, although, the upgrades aren't really that expensive or hard to get. Of course, we have the 4 LRs in the level 5, or the level 7 5 cost G-Quux, and then the red Gundam. The green red, the
red Gundam being green is forever going to bother me.
The red Gundam that's green, that's a rare from the booster. So those are kind of the main upgrades outside of maybe some commons or uncommons or things like that. But aside from that, you get 2 of the starter deck, you get a couple upgrades, you're probably in under $100, and then yeah, you have a deck that's kind of locals ready.
And while it may not be the most exciting thing, I will say this deck does carry a big advantage of the fact that this deck is straightforward. What you want to be doing is very clear. It is pretty good at getting into the cards that you want to be playing. So it is a pretty simple deck to play, and every game needs those workhorse decks, the kind of deck that you shuffle it up and it starts doing the thing it's going to do.
I, for one, am not looking forward to, despite trying my best in the earlier parts of the game, just getting G-Quuxed into G-Quuxed into G-Quux link, and suddenly I'm just dead, despite my best efforts, right? And that's just going to happen sometimes, and it's one of those decks that gets scarier the longer the game goes on, for sure.
Or you're going to be sitting there on your Zeta, and you're just going to watch it get first striked into oblivion.
Yeah, and it's wait, no, I thought I was supposed to have things with good stats. that was done early. Yeah, that's kind of where the strength of this deck lies. In terms of where I am confident in terms of this being a meta performer, I'm not super confident, unfortunately, despite, you know, kind of the cool play patterns and interactions that this deck does have. We need more lower end clan units, and we need more lower end clan units that help us get to that state in the game. I would love to have a replacement for the bird mode. I would love to have a replacement for our 2-1-2-2 that is not clan for some reason. I hate it. I would love to play something that's not a 2-2-2-2 with support 1. We just need better early game clan units, and I'm hoping that, you know, in the future, Bandai is going to be printing some cards that help us patch up that clear weakness of the deck. But right now, that's kind of where this deck struggles. We don't have blockers, we don't have things to stop the onslaught of 2-1-2-2. So if we see an aggro tempo deck that is just going for the dome, then we're sweating here. Which turns out that's a lot of decks in this game at this point. So.
Especially while we were building the deck, this is one of the decks that came together the fastest. It basically puts itself together, especially because in Booster, you only have 3 additional cards with Clan printed on it. So it's basically the starter deck with 2 to 3 extra cards from Booster thrown in, right?
Which seems to be a good shell for that, you know, additional support to exist in the future. It's the newest Gundam. It's pretty popular for what I know, so I'm hoping that we get some more cards in the future for it to patch up its weaknesses for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely an archetype that I think is, at the very least, worth investing in now. I can definitely see them getting 1 to 2 more cards next booster, and suddenly this deck goes to the moon.
So, Foam, we've basically been talking about the new shiny cards from either starter decks leading up to the set's release or the set's new LRs or build-arounds. Yeah, what's going on to the decks, the tuned decks of old from the starter decks from 1 through 4, as well as the booster Newtype Rising? Do any of these old decks get new tools? What's going on?
Oh, there are plenty of older decks that are getting new tools, and there are plenty of old decks that maintain their relevancy. I will say, if you have a set 1 deck that you love playing, don't feel like you need to replace it, although it may have some new toys available to it. And I think one of the greatest examples of that is a deck that I've been playing a lot. Blue-red is my favorite color combo from set 1. It is not one I expected to love, but it is the one I fell in love with once I started playing. And there is an archetype known as Cyber Newtype that definitely has some cool new toys to play with. And as you can see, a lot of returning familiar cards, but a handful of new ones. The biggest thing I want to talk about here is everybody knows him. Most people do not like him, especially when he's being used against them, but there's no Amuro in this deck. He has been replaced with 4 Murasame, and that is because, unlike Amuro's new type, 4 is a Cyber new type, which means that all your cards that link with Cyber new types now activate no matter which of your pilots you have.
How many copies of 4 Murasame?
We have 4 Murasame.
We have 4 more.
We've got the 4x4.
That might be harder to say than Green Gundam, who's red, but is green though, but is red.
I hate that you put me on a bit on the spot.
Sorry, my bad. You can continue your spiel.
For the viewers, that was not scripted at all.
It sure wasn't.
But, so, again, you could see the blue ping bones. We do have a fun new 2-1-2-2 in Hyzak. The biggest reason we absolutely do want to be running this over any other 2-1-2-2 because he has a nice little line of text on him that says Titan. And that leads into another new tool that's in this deck, and that is the new LR, Psycho Gundam. Now, Psycho Gundam is one of those cards that when you initially read it, it doesn't sound as crazy as it really is when you think about it. So it's a level 6 4-cost 4/5, so we're rough on the stat line there. Innate Breach 3, but the big reason to be playing it is when paired with a Cyber new type pilot. Anytime that a Titan card destroys a card in the shield zone, it heals for 2. This is not a once per turn, and it's any Titan card. So if Psycho Gundam is the one that does it, heal. If Hyzak does it, heal. If Psycho Gundam MA mode does it, heal. This actually represents such a huge threat to like mid-game decks because you have this huge bungus that punches through and then keeps living.
And, you know, of course, this scales with more Titans that you have in play. And we have, I mean, a couple of them. Do you think that's, you know, relevant to having more HP heals, or is just the Psycho Gundam counting himself matter for most games and the additional Titans not really matter that much?
Largely, you only have to, in testing, you only have to stick 1 additional Titan. Getting 4 healing means that you've essentially doubled it. It's acting as though it's a 4-9. And obviously it's going to be bigger than that because you either have it paired with Marina Cruz or 4, so that's going to make it a 6-6. So you wind up having like a 6-10. And the reason is because if you stick one other Titan unit on the board, Psycho Gundam heals himself for 2, other Titan unit heals him for 2. You don't need more than that to have gotten your value out of it. Everything past that point is just gravy, and it turns Psycho Gundam into this horrifying inevitability that you basically have to kill in one shot, or the resources you dedicate to killing him makes him just go even.
It's okay, I got Red Gundam to one-shot him, so no worries on that. But I mean, when it comes to the other Titans, right, we just have the 4 copies of the 2122, which is now Titan traded, which is very important for this deck. And then we also have Psycho Gundam MA mode. So we're dealing with like 7, potentially 9 other Titans as well. So, you can find it, you can get it, but it's probably not the end of the world if Psycho Gundam is just repairing to itself as well. So it seems to be doing just fine.
And then this all culminates in 4's ability, where when she is linked, once per turn, if the unit she's attached to heals, you draw a card if you have 4 or less in hand. We play very aggressively. It's very easy to get under 4 cards. And then between Psycho Gundam, the LR, healing itself with that shield damage, or MA mode having repair, it's very easy for 4 to very quickly start cycling cards back for you.
The 4 copies of 4 Murasame help you get back up to 4 cards in hand. I love it. Incredible Gundam gameplay going on right here. One last question for you, Fulminatus.
I never put together that 4 puts me on 4 cards till you said that just now.
Oh,
now I hate it.
I must be a genius. Let's talk a little bit about this Banshee Unicorn mode as well. This is something that I feel like people have always looked at and thought about as a potential option. I know a lot of Newtype pings have cut this card overall over the course of the set 1 meta. What's the reason for bringing it back here in this build here?
So the biggest reason to bring it back is it links with Cyber Newtype, so it links with all 8 copies of our pilots, especially Marita. You really need her to be swinging linked with pings.
No, there's benefits to cutting Amuro in any deck. That's crazy. That's news to me.
Well, it's funny that you say benefits to cutting Amuro, because a large part of the reason why Banshee Unicorn mode is here is because every once in a while you still need that Amuro ability.
Yeah.
And so when we pair our Unicorn mode, we do get that Amuro ability. Granted, not as on big targets. It is limited to 3 HP as opposed to Amuro's 5 HP targeting. But it gets that thing out of the way for you, so that way you can really push through, which is really important when it comes to cards like Psycho Gundam or just protecting your little tutus.
Right. To me, it's actually really, really scary just how much Cyber Newtype links there are in this deck. I'd imagine at the highest levels of competitive play, just racking your brain around the different types of links that the opponent could potentially have in hand is honestly just really, really nerve-wracking. Because it's like, okay, well, it could be the 3/4 statted Kshatriya that's with any Cyber Newtype, and then that's +2/+1, but then whether or not it's Marita or it's 4, Marita does more damage to me, then I have to math out what an additional damage would do to me, and then it's like, oh no, but like I want to keep this unit active, but what if it gets arrested? Oh no, you have the Banshee. Oh no, that's awful. Right, so it seems like, and this is kind of a unique threat of this deck in particular, just being able to link so many different things with so many different, or 2 different pilots, is just that anticipation or trying to play around particular lines of play. And then I'd imagine some short-sighted players, even myself in this instance, where like I am convinced myself that the opponent has a particular line, and they just pivot and go like, okay, I'll play this one instead because what you did actually plays into this link instead, right? So just having so many links is scary, is my thesis here.
Yeah, and well, not only does having so many links make it scary, but it's almost toolboxy in a way, in the fact that most of our units that are level 5 and up here, like, they're almost modal in the fact that, okay, cool, I can play a slower grind game with Psycho Gundam, I can be very aggressive with Psycho Gundam, I can use Kshatriya to soften units up for valuable trades, or I could just go really hard with it and just try to clear out enough of the board that I'm connecting with your shields. I can use Psycho Gundam MA mode with 4 to keep drawing cards, or I can link it with Marita to get my pings on a unit that has repair, so I keep getting pings because it lives longer.
Yeah, and never forget, 4 Murasame plus Kshatriya still works here, so, you know, there's like truly nothing off the table. There's truly nothing off the table here.
Yeah, that's Newtype or Cyber Newtype. But yeah, so having said all of that, Cyber Newtype ping was a proven deck in the previous format, and all this booster has given it is just more options. So whether it's the old build or the new build, I'm extremely confident in this deck's ability to perform in this meta.
Alright, so here's another deck that you recognize some cards from set 1 that we know maybe all too well at this point, but we have a new way to build it, right? So we're going to be talking about Gjallarhorn Survivor Blooded Orphans here. I think the biggest payoff card here is Gundam Chimaris, which is a level 5 4 cost, 4 AP, and 4 HP. It says on deploy, if there's 4 or more Gjallarhorn cards in your trash, you get to draw 2. If you do, discard 2. So this is kind of like an overflowing affection on a unit, which has pretty decent stats at that. A 4 cost for 4/4 is nothing to sneeze at. And the biggest drawback is maybe that forces you into a Gjallarhorn package. So, you know, we know green-white Wing Gundam all too well, and of course you're seeing them on screen right now. But this kind of gives us the what-if scenario of this deck can be built a little bit differently in the wake of a brand new archetype, being able to combine with it fairly well. So overall, the Gjallarhorn cards have that payoff of the draw 2, but let's go over like some of the more cards of the overall package as well. So, you know, we have a 2/1/2/2. We know and love that as well. And then we have a whole bunch of other, of course, white units being in the archetype that we get to draw from. So Gaelio Schwalbe Grays is a level 3 2 cost with 3/3 that conditionally has blocker as long as you have another Gjallarhorn unit in play. Of course, it's worse Rick Diaz for some reason, but if you have another Gjallarhorn, which this deck is built to have plenty of, then it's no big deal. A starter deck card that, of course, has to fit into this deck as well. McGillis's Schwalbe Grays. It is a level 4 3 cost, 4 AP and 2 HP with blocker. And then when it's paired, you get to choose an enemy unit that is level 3 or lower and gets AP -2. That's one of the reasons why Kira was played in other white-green Wing Gundam lists, is because it's very important to contest board and make sure that you can get to the eventuality of playing your Wing Gundams and resetting the board from that state onward. So, you know, having some instances here of different AP -2 abilities is very important. So the link here is Gaelio Bodwin, which is a level 3 1 cost pilot that gives +1/+1 in stats. And then if you have 4 more Gjallarhorn cards in trash, so if you have Chimaris' ability online, you have this ability online, and you get to choose an enemy unit to give it AP -2. So important, you have some units, your units have decent stat lines, you have AP- to help sustain the board and things like that, and then eventually you get into your end game of Wing Gundam 0. Is this better than traditional green-white wing-focused decks from set 1 format? I'm honestly unsure. The biggest payoff here, I think, is just drawing more cards and be able to see, you know, perhaps more Wing Gundam links that we like seeing, or more Wing Gundam Zeros in case you need to reset the board a second time for some reason, things like that. Just having more consistency with your top end and just being able to get there. But aside from that, a pretty interesting deck, and kind of combines 2 archetypes that seem unrelated, completely unrelated, and something that wouldn't really mash well together into something that plays kind of akin to what the green-white wing decks of old kind of played like. So this is our Gjallarhorn list.
I will say that in a lot of our testing, especially when Reala was playing this deck against me, the one thing that I definitely noticed, as opposed to a lot of, at least historical green-white builds, we've seen them change, especially towards the end of GDO1 format. But it is interesting how the Gjallarhorn units do provide kind of an early game. They themselves aren't necessarily leading anywhere. They kind of just ultimately culminate in Chimaris being a greater cycle. but it does give you the means to get through your deck faster, potentially get to more bird modes, set up more heroes and more wings. But you do that without necessarily just completely giving up the board and like playing a bunch of cycle commands, right?
And of course, like to me, it's so interesting how many instances of AP minus we have here, because that just like makes the difference in so many board states and what allows us to get to that late game. So we have a new base as well, level 4 2 cost. It has 5 HP, and it's a Gjallarhorn specific base. So, standard base fare, you get your card to hand, but if you have a friendly Gjallarhorn unit in play, then you can choose to AP minus 2 something as well. And of course, AP minus 2 does stack, so if you have 2 targets, or 1 target that you want to AP minus 2 twice, then you can do that. Very versatile in that sense. So, overall, Gjallarhorn, despite their stats just being kind of, average, kind of vanilla, the AP minus 2, as with Kira, that we see in a lot of different decks, just makes a difference in a lot of cases. So that's how I'm feeling with this deck. In terms of overall confidence, I'm not really quite sure if it's better, like I said, to the overall green-white wing decks of old, but I think it always is important when there's new cards that come out to not immediately write off something that comes out that's new. It's always worth, if you want to be as competitive as possible and try to find out the best builds as possible, to never write off an archetype just because you read it once and say, oh, I'm not feeling that. So this is at least maybe the first experimentation of the video.
So one of our goals when we were building these deck lists, we always label it every good deck list, but as you can see, some of these lists we don't have the most confidence in, and a large part of that is because we do want to do our best to try to represent, at the very least, every LR that comes out in the set, largely because I believe all cards serve home, and oftentimes it's easy to write off something because it doesn't read the best at first glance, but then you test it and it surprises you, right? This isn't one of those cases, because Elmeth, while it reads good, it is a level 6 card in an archetype that really wants the game to basically be over by then. But having said that, it still does provide some interesting gameplay in the fact that it is a large statted unit, being a 4/4 at level 6 for 5 cost, but when it's linked, it gives itself plus 2 AP, meaning that we're getting it up to essentially a 7/5. However, the biggest reason to be playing it is its first ability, and that is when it's deployed, you check the top 5 for a Zeon pilot, and if it's there, add it to your hand. So to court that ability, we are running more pilots than normal. We're on 9 pilots in this deck. Real and I very much so hesitate to go over 8 pilots because pilots clog up, but luckily this is the one archetype where we really want that, because basically everything past level 2 wants to be piloted.
Yeah, we have the friendly old faces of everything that wants to be linked with Char. I guess not everything, but we're missing the Char Zaku 2 token maker, but we have the starter deck, Char Zaku 2, we have the new white Gundam that links with Char, we have the Gelgoog, and in testing there's just games where it feels like Char gets linked more than 4 times because Elmeth's grabbing Char, Gelgoog is salvaging your Char to be played again. So like in the games that go especially long, not that this deck is like super great at playing long, but in the games that do go long, it's like I look across the table from me, I'm just like, enough with this Char stuff, just be done with it. But of course, Char is high maneuver, my blockers are crying, and sometimes I just lose a game or 2.
Also, more than once, you have completely folded to the fact that White Gundam has 4 HP as opposed to a Zaku's 3 HP when linked with Char.
Yeah, it's not fun. that is not fun.
It's always really funny when the unit with high maneuver lives with 1 HP and you go, oh, that's another shield.
Yep, that's another. Yep, so much I can do about that. And there's times like that where I wish I was playing Newtype Ping.
Yeah, just to get that 1 more damage out of it. But as you can see, we pretty much have our roots in what was an early GDO1 deck where people were running a mono green Zeon aggro. Obviously, we're not mono green, largely because we got to do something really funny in that we got a 2/1/2/2 to add to the deck that's in red, but it's a Zeon.
And that's the card. That's the one thing.
It's Zeon instead of Clan, though.
I'm upset about that. Still am.
So another huge play pattern in this deck, and something that got experimented with early, but I feel like it definitely comes out more now that we're going in a higher range of levels in this deck, and that is Zanzibar deploying something that is level 4 or lower. Sometimes you just get to cheat a lot of costs by deploying a base and having it go, okay, cool, Zanzibar, Char's Gelgoog, resolve Char's Gelgoog, link it, oh, I still have 2 resources left. Here's a regular Gelgoog for you.
Sometimes they do be doing that, though. The biggest thing about this deck is that, you know, we're kind of playing like quasi aggro, and like that's like kind of the best I can explain it, because of course we're playing this big pilot searcher at the end that I guess helps us go even more aggro. So to me, it seems like this deck is like kind of suffering a little bit from a mixed identity crisis, but overall is like still getting you towards that overall game plan. But you know, it is an interesting concept of a deck. Of course, Elmath deserved to get at least a little bit of testing. One thing that is interesting about Elmath is that, like, okay, suppose it wasn't the big winner of this set, which we think it isn't at this point in time. Could it be a big winner in a future set? What are your thoughts on like the future of Elmath?
I do think Elmath potentially has room to grow, especially if we get more support that pushes Zeon to expand more into the top range. So like we get some cards that let them stave off early, or at the very least opens up the space for them to play cards to protect their faces early. And then we have more payoffs to the top of the range, which I think is a fair thing to expect, because Char is Char. We have like 3 more Gundam series that they can add to this game to give Char more cards dedicated to him. I mean, we're waiting on literally Char's counterattack. So I think that there's plenty of space for Elmath. And something else that I want to bring up, especially because you borderline crashed out at me about this game. Every once in a while, Elmath will just pull a Lala off the top for you to immediately link and take that last shield.
Yeah, and then of course I ask you, you know. Well, I mean, I don't even have to ask you. You reveal the pilot. It's just like, okay. Well, knowing that it's the Elmath that got you in is makes it even worse. Just makes it so much worse.
Having a handful of Zaku's and then just flip the pilot you need.
Yeah, I do have to ask this question because I think a lot of people are on this idea that playing 8 Char is the way. You know, you take us out of red, you put us in white. The only white card we're playing is Quattro, that also counts as Char. Why didn't you go this particular route? Do you like the variety in pilots here? Do you think going over our 9 pilots is too much? Where are you with that?
I definitely think if you were just solely focused on Char, you could justify a Quattro Vegeta just to make sure that you hit your Char links. However, the biggest problem with that in this specific build is he is not Zeon. So if you see him on your Elmath, you can't take him. He further dilutes your pool for things like Char Zaku 2. And then finally, because we're using Chaliabov to be that 2/2 stat stick, he doesn't enable high maneuver, and he doesn't enable Lala because he's not another Zeon unit. So while he does give you more linkage for Chars, he doesn't activate anything else in the deck that Zeon's trying to do.
It almost feels like Bandai put the can be treated as Char Assemble on Quattro just to throw us a bone, to be like, hey look, you can do this. Not that we advise you to do it, but you can.
I mean, it is fair because he is Char.
Yeah, it's so AUEG specific, and also forces you in white and doesn't, you know, you miss out on the high maneuver, you miss out on the extra AP. It's just, oh my gosh. It seems like only something that's cool that you can do in theory and not something that you should actually be doing.
I mean, you're talking a lot of smack. It's going to be wild when they release that hybrid Zeon AUEG card in set 3.
Yeah, that's going to be, that'll be a time for sure, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Another big note that I did want to make of this deck while we're getting caught up in our memes. This is probably the best that a turning point in history gets. We're on 9 pilots. They are all Newtypes. So generally when you play this card, you are looking at top 3 and you are cycling.
Counterpoint, this is also an AUEG, and AUEG is the better deck. So Turning Point in History is better in AUEG.
Yeah, because but AUEG is running less pilots.
One less pilot.
Still less.
Okay, fine. Turning Point of History is the slightly worse card in a very much highly better deck. Got him. All right, where are you feeling on confidence for this? I know we kind of,
I don't know. I was feeling pretty confident that you made fun of me. Nah, I actually do have like a moderate level of confidence in this deck. It is still at its core an aggro deck that terminates with a lot of high maneuver and then has access to a random breach 5, which, as we all know, is that perfect number to blow up bases while killing a unit. So while this may not be, the next deck to fear in the meta, it can definitely take games.
All right, so let's provide a little bit of background for those listening on how this deck came about. So, Foam was tasked with creating a deck that revolves around a lot of the age cards that exist within this set, and spent the longest window out of all the decks testing this, and I could hear Foam's forehead smashing on the table from far away. And it was not, it sounded like the testing was not going really well. So, to kind of give you a little bit of inside baseball about Side 9, this is our little template that we use to talk about each of these decks, mostly unscripted here, but we have a little bit of guidance. I'm just going to do a dramatic reenactment of this document real quick. How does it win? Foam's response. IDK, man. Ramp without dying. What is it weak at? / worst matchup. Decks that play cards. Why did you pick these cards? Locked into green Earthfed, so we're playing all that archetypes playables. Otherwise, we're just abusing a smidgen of Earthfed's energy and Amuro. How confident are you on the deck? Lol. No. And with that, I will open the floor up to Fulminatus to talk about their masterpiece here. This is Age Cope.
Okay. So, I don't normally like to just poo-poo all over an archetype. I feel like in most environments, especially in Gundam, it's not hard to make something playable or see where something is going. And when we look at the Age cards, what they're trying to do is pretty apparent. What Age wants to do is it really wants to play cards that give it EX resources to ramp up to get its level up to 7, at which points its effects turn on. Unfortunately, that in and of itself, while an understandable game plan, does not necessarily make it a good game plan. Because what you're trying to do to win is you're trying to hit level 7, at which point you're going to play a Big Bungus Age 1 Titus, which is a 5/5 with Breach. We're used to seeing cards like those, or play a smaller Age 1 Titus, which is a 2-cost 4/4 when you're level 7 because it gains bonus AP, or play your Age 1 Spallow, which when linked at level 7, innately gets First Strike. And I think Real and I agree, First Strike is debatably the best keyword in this game.
It's so good.
And so something that just innately has it once you meet its condition. It's not for the turn. It's not a one-shot. Gundam Death Scythe gets it for one turn. G.F.S gets it for one turn. This thing just has it. If it lives multiple turns, you get to keep First Strike. That all sounds really good, but generally once you hit level 7, you're dead. Because it turns out Age 1 discarding a card, specifically a green Earthfed, which is why we're on so many, just to gain a bonus resource is not a great time. Playing Age Device to get an EX resource and thus losing tempo because you had to put 2 resources into something that doesn't advance your board state, not a great time. So largely what wound up happening is I wound up in a deck where I'm using a handful of blue Earth Federation cards to try to staple the mess together. And sometimes the deck performs well because you do hit that level 7, you manage to play a bunch of Tituses in a row, you start outstatting your opponent, and then you finish up, they play a blocker to try to slow you down, so you just play your Spallow and you First Strike it out.
I will say, though, despite us not being able to say that much positive about how the deck performs in testing, I think it is important to talk about kind of how cool this idea is as an archetype and also where we think this archetype could go in the future. So I personally really like the idea of being at a high level, but then spitting out a bunch of low costed things. I do like this deck's idea of getting bonus effects when you're at that level 7. and being able to play multiple things. So like, of course, we take a look at Big Green as a concept in Gundam. We take a look at Wing. We take a look at Wing Gundam Zero. And those are like high level, high cost cards. In some cases, these cards are like high level, low cost. And it's cool getting to be able to have multiple of them. Because instead of just going tall on one unit, you get to go wide and tall with several units. And in theory, right, that doesn't sound too bad as a deck concept in this game. It's just unfortunate that the execution ended up being this way in the set. So I think if nothing else, we can talk about how cool of an idea it is, if nothing else.
Yeah, I do think the quote-unquote intended play pattern is actually sick. This idea that you are investing in EX resources to get your level up, but then playing cheap units so you're not actually spending your EX resources to get your stat line. And then as you're level underneath the EX resources, so as you play a resource each turn, and without EX resources, now you're level 7, you cash in those EX resources that you've been sitting on to get your level up to play more cards. And because you're playing cheap cards with high stats, we talk about all the time that sometimes the coolest thing to do is just have 3 2-1 2-2s so you can play 3 units in a turn. Well, we're doing that, but with 2 cost 4/4s, right? Like, that play pattern is awesome. It's the getting there that causes problems.
And and the issue as well is that a lot of times it feels like getting to level 7 even with EX resource is just problematic in general, because it takes too long to get there even with the ramp. So
yeah, and again, I cannot understate how much it really sucks discarding a card, having to be on a specific card. So sometimes the Green Earth Federation unit that you want to be at level 7 to get the bonus effects of has to go bye-bye because you're discarding it to get the EX resource in the first place. But also just going down a card in this game is so painful that I can see the idea that this deck and archetype is going for. And we have a philosophy: if we don't think something's good, we don't want to show you, but it felt wrong not to include the archetype, so at the very least we could explain our stance on it. It is a cool idea. It just needs a little bit more time in the oven.
It needs some time to age, if you think. It needs to age like wine, I think, maybe. Is that funny? Can we keep that in?
However, while age may not be the most inspiring deck to me, we do have a deck that I am actually very excited for. And it may look familiar to people who are used to playing against blue-red ping. This is the bones of that. However, we have cool new toys and a returning card that I think kind of fell out of the meta, but I feel it fits perfectly here. So we have taken blue-red ping and we have cut our Maritas, I Know, Sacrilege, and subbed them in with Haman Karns, who also brings the ping to the table, but most importantly, enables our new LR in Quibbly, which is a red 7/5 with a 5/5 stat line, and the ability that when linked, it gains suppression for the turn, but also when it's paired with a Neo Zeon pilot, on attack, you can choose 1 damage target and deal 2 damage to it. So, one thing to note is that 2 damage ping is huge. Well, there's a lot of hoops we will jump through just to deal 1 damage, and dealing 2, great. Suppression, great way to push through shields, especially if you're behind. This does both on a good stat line.
What could possibly go wrong? That sounds pretty cool. I mean, honestly, what we're doing here is just getting rid of a ping card to play another ping card.
It's also worth noting that Haman Karn, while we're giving up our Marita to use her, when she pairs, she pings something for 1. So even Haman Karn herself can set up the Quibbly.
Yeah, I think, honestly, the bones of this deck are still there. It's really cool just seeing it take new forms, as time goes on. This Haman Karn package happens a little bit later, but it's a little bit more impactful. Having suppression to just really, really close out the game is very scary. I know sometimes the blue-red Newtype ping, especially the more aggressive versions, if there was an issue with those decks, it would just be finding that final swing after the opponent has some blockers on board, just being able to do that final decisive damage. But when you have something with suppression that can take out 2 shields at one time, that job becomes a lot easier. And of course, Haman Karn pings just like Marita does. This one seems like a more concentrated ping, so whereas Ikoroshia spreads out pings, obviously Quibbly gets to do it on 1 unit. So overall, I think if you averaged out the amounts of pings, that'll be a fun little side project for a future video, maybe. Average pings per turn or something like that. But I'd venture to guess that it averages out to be about the same.
Yeah, and again, one big note here is that Kshatriya and Marita, they ping for 1 point of damage at a time, right? Whereas Quibbly is a concentrated shot of 2. And as we're aware, 2 is twice 1. So this means that if at any point, like, Quibbly lives through a turn cycle and you get to get another round of ping out, suddenly that damage starts scaling a lot faster.
Right. And yeah, tell me a little bit about Sinanju. This is a card that we were very excited about. We have, of course, we had a moment where we were very hyped about Sinanju in our starter deck video about him, and then he kind of fell out of the meta a little bit, just in popular decks. So what's bringing him back here? Is it really the Hamon Karn synergy that really kind of brings the point home here? Or do we just think Sinanju is a good pick for the stages of the game that he's present in?
It's largely because Sinanju fixes the 2 problems with Quibbly. So Quibbly has an issue in the fact that suppression really doesn't like bases. So you need something to clear bases. Well, a high maneuver, large attack unit is pretty good at clearing bases. Quibbly also needs units to already be damaged for it to ping them. So a unit that is high maneuver, that's clearing your bases, that then chooses a target to deal 2 damage to when it does that, becomes the ultimate setup. So even if you have, like, if you've already cashed in your Hamon Karn ping, so you can't set that up, Sinanju just closes up that gap. It also adds more of a top end to this deck. We're already going to level 7 to play Quibbly. A huge part of the reason that I feel Sinanju kind of fell out of the meta is because at being at level 6, that was a point where Red Blue really wanted to be closing out the game. We weren't really slowing down to that speed, and Sinanju himself, while being an incredibly powerful unit, still in my opinion one of the stronger LRs in a vacuum, just wasn't really doing enough for the deck to the point that it's like, I want to be playing Banshee Destroy this turn. However, if we're already going to level 7, that means we got to go through level 6. So why not drop a Sinanju on that level 6 turn?
And for those of you who lost hope, I'm still believing in bringing back full frontal one of these days. Of course, that day isn't quite today, but at least seeing the one half of the full combo, especially when it's quite synergistic with the rest of our shell, is quite a welcome addition to have as well. So yeah, big fan of the Sinanju in this deck as well. Like, it gets you there, and that's what matters.
And then another note that I wanted to bring forward. Right now it's at 2. It might go up. A card that has actually consistently overperformed the more I played it was All Range Attack. So this deck is no stranger to running either close combat for just a straight shot of 2 damage or a battle of aces. So when ping was already dealt, you could deal 3 damage, get that 4 damage total. That greatly increased your range on units. All Range Attack has honestly been kind of nuts because almost invariably anytime you play it, your opponent's going to have 3 units. So it just deals 3 damage basically unconditional. However, if you're into that aggro deck that is absolutely spammed out, it's 2/1 2/2s, so you're staring at 4 to 5 units, that's 4 to 5 damage for 2 resources. That is an insane rate.
Sometimes when you play all range attack, in addition to all the pings that are already present, it feels like you're just wiping the board, but asymmetrically. And, you feel like you're walking away, like you're making it out like a bandit, just having all these pings and asymmetrically clearing the board. It feels like you just can't lose.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because as you play ping, it gets more valuable the more of you have. Like, every point of damage is more valuable than the last. So, being able to deal 1 damage to everything is pretty good. Being able to deal 2 damage, even better, 3 damage, so on and so forth. So All Range Attack just really does a great job of setting that up. It creates that environment where Quibbly can now hit a target because you all range attacked it, or, as can often happen, you deal 1 damage to something and then Sinanju collides with shields and he deals the next 2, and that 3 starts clearing a lot of stuff. That's a dead Rictius. That's a dead 4/3 because that isn't just Rizel anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it feels like a lot of this deck is just kind of like arithmetic. I know that, during the games that we played, when this deck was, kind of sitting at your side of the table, you would take a quick second just to like do some quick math and be like 1 + 2, 2 + 1. And, the answer both times was 3. But, just when you're playing a ping deck, sometimes you just have to do like that little quick math check to make sure, like, okay, am I clearing the board this turn? Am I clearing just 1 unit, 2 units. How close can I get to like completely turning this game in the favor of me winning it? So, you know, it adds up and makes the full HP total of a lot of units in this game.
I also love those moments where you had to stop and do math and be like, oh wait, I can't swing my units this way because that's going to leave multiple things at 1, and I don't know if you have an all-range attack or not.
See, that's the worst type of the ways that you can lose, when you yourself are your own worst enemy. Here we have new Uni Aggro, also known as Daughtress Aggro, also known as Citizens Take a Stand, also known as the Chef is in the kitchen. So we have a whole bunch of units in this set that allow us to make a 0-1, you heard that right, 0 AP, 1 HP Daughtress token. And I know what you may be thinking, what am I possibly going to do with this thing? It's a 0 AP, it's not going to deal any damage to units I attack, it's not going to be able to deal any damage to bases, it's not going to be able to deal any damage to shields, to even break the shields. So like, what are we doing these things? And the more attentive of you may realize that Citizens Take a Stand is a beta card that pumps units. And so the idea of this deck in a nutshell is play a bunch of low cost things, low to the ground units, such as Daughtress, which has support 1, or the other 2 Daughtress cards that make Daughtress tokens, such as Daughtress Command, a level 2 costs 3 AP, 1 HP, that when it's destroyed, you have another new UNE unit in play, you get to make a Daughtress token. Or the Daughtress Weapon, which is a level 2 cost 2 AP, 1 HP, that gets to make that token on deploy with the same condition instead. And so you get to play this stuff really early. You want to see the support 1 Daughtress on turn 1 as well, so you get to make those tokens and meet their condition. But once you amass this huge board, you then buff everything with Citizens Take a Stand and start going to face. This is a deck that is basically aggro at its core, although I think Fulm accurately described it as waiting for the chance to alpha strike the opponent. So it's a little bit more of a controlled aggro, controlled environment for how we're going to be doing it, because we have to wait until the right time. But so far we've had a whole lot of fun with this deck, and honestly it's so strong overall. And we left it to the very end of this video just to reward, I guess, a few players. You know, there are players that want to play something that's quite interesting, that's also very strong. And yeah, it's aggro. Early in the format, aggro works, as was the thesis of one of our other videos. So yeah, having a great time with this one so far.
Yeah, I definitely have to say, we talk about alpha striking, and the reason is because it really sucks is when you turn something sideways at the wrong time and it doesn't have the ability to get through, and you watch a unit die as you're staring at the Citizens Take a Stand in your hand, as opposed to just like leaving it active for a turn. And then next turn you play your Citizen Take a Stand and just start wiping your opponent's shield and or board.
Of course, we have Vesalius in this deck that just gives us a little bit extra AP plus if we need to, you know, get a Daughtress token in, you know, clearing a shield range, for example. A suite of 2/1/2/2s, and let's talk about the top end, the very, very high end, high level card, which obviously is not that high level, Gundam Versago. So this is a card that is really funny that it ends up fitting in this deck overall, because this is a card that you just read the set list with no context and you read the card. And my first impression of this card is that this is a really good rate. It is a level 5 4 cost with 4 AP and 4 HP. It has Breach 1, which of course, as we know, that there's no difference between Breach 1 and Breach Infinity as long as there's no base on the opponent's side of the field. So that's really strong, because we have a low breach number, but it's not coming at too much of a cost in terms of like the stats of the cards, for example. And then on deploy, if there are 3 or less enemy shields, you get to choose an enemy with 5 or less AP and deal 2 damage to it. So you're getting Breach, you're getting Ping, you're getting AL Strike stats at level 5. And of course you have a pilot, Shagia Frost, that allows you to link and, you know, of course, do the whole entire link play where you get to attack the turn it's played. It is a +1/+2 pilot that on swing you get to choose a new UNE unit to get AP +2 during this turn, which is also the Daughtress tokens. So just by playing this link and, you know, doing what you want to do anyway, if you have a Daughtress token on field, you can then put it in the territory where it can attack a shield. So really just a whole lot of play patterns of this deck where you play things, you buff them up, you swing at the opponent's face. It kind of feels like the mobile game, like gacha game design philosophy, where it's just like, all right, you get a bunch of dudes, you roll on the gacha, you buff them up. All right, cool, they're buffed up. All right, cool, now we're going to go do the end game content. And that's kind of the design philosophy that this deck is going for as well. I never thought I'd compare Gundam Card Game to gacha games, but, here we are, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. I mean, Gundam does have a gacha.
Is it? Yeah, I've heard about that.
However, so I do want to take a moment to talk about the fact that I think we're both pretty big on Gundam Versago, but I do want to be clear, it is a little bit of low action for the LR Solana deck, but the ideal in this deck is this is coming down on turn 5, and it is probably going to swing once, and then the game ends that turn. So it doing what it does for one swing is the extremely relevant part. It stops a blocker from blocking you due to its breach 1. It potentially clears the way with its ping damage, and then it and like 1 to 2 other units get through, and that's the point that the game ends, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we still are operating on the aggro framework, and thankfully, of course, due to the way Gundam is designed, allowing draws on the first turn as well. I didn't find myself really losing that many cards. Obviously, I would have on average less cards than the opponent, but it is helpful that, of course, we are still playing the 4 base. We are still playing 4 pilots that burst, so sometimes you get incidental card advantage and things like that. And then also, in addition to that, Citizens Take a Stand on burst adds it to your hand as well. So, you have about the same amount of bursts that other decks do, despite not being on the 8 pilot paradigm that we see in a lot of Gundam decks here. So, really just having, it feels like it has just enough cards to do it at once and end the game in the time that it wants to, which is honestly on that level 5 turn if you can afford it, and then level 6 at the very latest.
Having been on the receiving end of this deck a few times, it's amazing just how many times you will lose the proverbial coin flip and suddenly you're staring at 4 units or 5 units on turn 4, Citizens Take a Stand gets played, and it's like, oh, I'm just dead.
I do want to talk about Fortress Defense here, or the pilot Dozel Zabi. It's a level 5 2 cost that is from set 1 that deploys 2 Zaku 2 tokens, which are the 1 AP, 1 HP tokens. So, very important to note is that it deploys these tokens active. I know that Goof gets to deploy a token that does it so rested alongside a lot of the Daughtress cards in the deck that do so, but these Zakus are coming in, they're ready to attack on the following turn that can't be targeted. And then also, funnily enough, what ends up being kind of relevant is that if you want to go for speed of attacking shields versus just going wider because your board is already wide enough, it is a +1/+0 pilot, so you just put that one of your Daughtresses and there you go, you're ready to go to take out a shield. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, so, and sometimes that's all you need is you'll hit a point where you have essentially watched your opponent start to stabilize, they start getting units on the board, and then you just drop a Fortress Defense. You are now wide enough that exactly 1 attack can get through, and you only need 1 attack to win the game.
Yeah. And Fortress Defense is what gets the job done for you. So overall, that's the idea of the deck. I know what you may be thinking. How does this deck deal with a Gundam Lifrith? How does this deck deal with Rick DS? It does struggle quite a bit. Thankfully, we do have AP pump, so in those matchups, I found that waiting to play that Citizens Take a Stand on turn 4 while you just build up your wide board could be really helpful, because then that blocker is dying to 1 hit, and then you still have the board to be able to try to go for shields. Especially helpful if you have the Versago link in hand. I think that's one of the reasons why Versago is justified within the deck as well, because you get to catch up a little bit on tempo in those stalemate scenarios where you kind of have to wait a little bit longer. So overall, I'm a huge fan of this deck. I think it's fun. I already ordered all these cards to get rolling, and honestly, I think it's going to be quite a surprise for a lot of people, because to me, it seems like a lot of new Uni cards are getting overlooked despite the archetype being quite solid overall.
Yeah, I definitely think that this is one of those decks. It may not perform super well over the course of the entire meta, but I definitely think as people are learning the meta, this is one of those decks that can absolutely just come out and absolutely steal games.
For sure. All right, we hope you enjoyed all of these deck lists for Dual Impact. We, kind of spoiled you a little bit today. There's 11 deck lists as opposed to the 6 that we did for set 1, but that's just kind of the challenge that we have with an ever-expanding game with more cards and more synergies and, even a new color in this case, right? So that's where we have that. And thanks for being along for this ride. I know it's been quite a long video, but we're happy to have made these decks and do some preliminary testing for the Set 2 format. And with all that said, we will see you next mission.